You know that uneasy feeling you get when you text a friend and they don't respond right away? It's no big deal at first. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe their phones are on silent. But then hours go by, and that's kind of weird. But maybe you're busy and you totally forget. And then a whole night goes by with no, sorry, just saw this text, and no laughing emoji, just silence. The next morning comes and still nothing, and you call, and it goes straight to voicemail. Your stomach drops a little and you call again, voicemail again. And that sinking feeling gets worse. For 20-year-old Megan Barroso's friends and family, that gut punch came on July 5th of 2001. Megan had always had her phone on her. Her friends even joked about it, calling it her lifeline. She never missed a call, always checked in. But after celebrating the 4th of July together, after hugging her best friend Lindsay goodbye at 2:45 in the morning, Megan simply went quiet. It wasn't the missed lunch date with her dad or even the empty seat at work the next morning that set off the loudest alarm bells. It was her phone. The calls were piling up unanswered. Friends were first feeling annoyed and then worried and finally terrified because Megan, the girl who always thought everything through, every what if, was suddenly unreachable. When they finally discovered Megan's phone, she wasn't the one holding it. Instead, it was sitting on a blood-smeared car seat in an abandoned rental car, idling on a median along a quiet stretch of California highway. But by the time her loved ones realized just how wrong things have gone, Megan had been missing for hours and hours. And what investigators eventually uncovered led them into a darkness that no one could have imagined, especially not an innocent 20-year-old college student, and she wasn't the only victim. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. Now, many of you that have been here for a while know that my life is pretty much non-stop. I'm a mom of a 13-year-old, I've got a 10-month-old baby who just discovered crawling, and my husband and I are both busy YouTubers, which means life is a constant juggle between filming videos, chasing after our kids, taking care of our 2 dogs, remodeling our home, and planning our wedding. So let's just say laundry is the last thing that we have time for. And honestly, sometimes our clothes don't even make it into the hamper. They just pile up everywhere, totally guilty. So when I discovered Rinse, who is the sponsor of today's video, it completely changed our laundry routine, and it's seriously given me a lot of time back, about 3 hours a week to be exact. Rinse is America's first and largest national clothing care brand, delivering an exceptional hassle-free laundry and dry cleaning service directly to your door. As I said, we are in the middle of remodeling our home, and we were without a washer and dryer, so it was the perfect time for us to give Rinse a try. All I had to do was open the Rinse app or head to rinse.com to schedule a pickup. It's so convenient because they're available 7 days a week, even same day if you need it. Between 8 and 10 p.m., our friendly Rinse valet swung by with free personalized Rinse bags. I think these are so nice, actually, and they picked everything up, and I didn't even need to be home thanks to Rinse Drop. I can leave my Rinse bag full of dirty items right outside my door, and my Rinse valet will come grab it. And then magically, okay, maybe it's not magic, although it can sometimes feel like magic, but professionally, our laundry returns perfectly folded, smelling fresh, and the dry cleaning arrives neatly hung in these great garment bags. Rinse cleans everything expertly from your basic t-shirts to delicate dresses, so you never have to worry about your favorite clothes getting damaged. Plus, Rinse is eco-friendly. They use gentle detergents and reusable packaging. But what I really appreciated the most is their customer service. Real humans were helping me every step of the way. I got text messages letting me know that our valet was on the way, how many stops he had left, and when he arrived, he even told me I could add a few items if I wanted them to hang dry. It was that simple because life is hard enough right now without laundry stress. I don't know who does your laundry, but just think about it. Every order comes with a Rinse guarantee as well. If anything isn't perfect, they will re-clean it for free every single time. That kind of commitment is why I genuinely really love this service. It's like having a personal laundry assistant who's always available. How amazing is that? So if you want to see how easy it is, download the Rinse app right now and use my special link, rinse.com/Kimbyrleigha, and you will get this laundry hack plus $25 off your first order and waived delivery fees. I'm telling you, you have to check it out. And I want to thank Rinse not only for washing our clothes, but for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the case for today. The first sign that something wasn't right was a little before 4 a.m. on July 5th. So right in the middle of the night of 4th of July. So it's a night when people are partying, they're drinking, and maybe some of them are choosing to drive. So it's not uncommon to hear or even see a car accident happen on a holiday like this. A security guard that was patrolling near businesses in Moore Park, California, thought that he heard some fireworks going off close to a nearby overpass off of New Los Angeles Avenue. They were muffled and they were off in the distance, and he wasn't really in a hurry to check them out. But while he was on his normal patrol, he's made his way over there, and he thought that he was going to have to tell some teenagers to cut it out. But right away, he realized it was actually a car accident. There was a dark green Pontiac Sunfire that looked like it had veered off the street and appeared to jump the median and get stuck. And as the security guard got closer, he realized the car was idling. It was on. The driver's side door was wide open, the headlights were still on, and so were the windshield wipers. His first thought was this was a drunk driver who bailed on their car and ran away to avoid getting a DUI. They must have been in such a hurry. It appeared they had left their sandals behind. She left them behind because these were women's sandals. A left sandal was flipped over on the ground outside a few feet away from the vehicle, and the right sandal was right side up, and the straps were adorned with colorful flower charms, and that one was on the floorboard right inside the driver's side door. But as the security guard got as close as he was to be able to see the sandal inside, he also noticed something more alarming: blood. And I'm sure this was a lot to take in, especially in the middle of the dark, but blood was everywhere and it was still wet. The driver must have been injured. There was blood on the steering wheel, the driver's side seat, and even on the floor. He immediately called 911, and officers from the Ventura Sheriff's Office quickly came out to the scene where the green 2001 Pontiac Sunfire was awkwardly straddling the median. Detectives Rick Barrios and Tim Lorenzen were some of the first officers on the scene, and what had initially appeared to be an abandoned vehicle was now being treated as a potential crime scene. It was obvious that this car was covered in bullet holes. Yeah, so that definitely stood out right away. Most of the holes were concentrated on the front windshield of the driver's side of this car, and the window on the driver's side was completely shattered. There was glass all over the driver's seat. It was on the ground outside and sticking around the window frame and just hanging there. There was a bullet hole in the hood of the car, on the door of the driver's side, as well as the back passenger side, just riddled with bullets. And considering the blood that was inside, they knew the driver must have been hit. But what was odd was there was no trail of blood leading away from this car, only that lone sandal outside. So it really didn't make sense. They needed more clues. They began examining the exterior of the car, and they noticed a distinctive swipe mark on the driver's side that extended from about the driver's door to the back of the car. It appeared that someone had sideswiped the Pontiac. They took a lot of pictures, and I have some of those to show you, and I've been showing you this mark on the car. It's a scratch through the Pontiac's paint on the driver's side. A picture was starting to come into focus, but they still needed more. So they looked inside the vehicle, and they found a white purse with a blue zipper pull and blue sides on the passenger seat. It was open, and there was blood smeared on the zipper and the opening of the purse. They looked inside, but they did not locate a driver's license. And on the passenger side floor, they found a cell phone with a little blood on it as well. It was one of those old style Nokia phones, but back then, that was the phone that everyone had. It was face down, and on the back there was a worn out sticker that read "Angry Girl." Between the sandals, the phone, and the purse, officers assumed they were dealing with an injured female driver. But where was she? What happened to her? They were still scouring this area for clues. It had been blocked off by this point, and crime scene technicians were fanning out to try to find any evidence on that roadside. And that's when they located 5 shell casings at the end of the exit ramp from the freeway. It was at the traffic light at New Los Angeles Avenue. They kept searching, and they found one more shell casing about 100 feet away in the intersection, towards the direction where the car was found on the median. Now they have an idea of where this car was when it was shot at. While it was sitting at the light about to turn on New Los Angeles, it appeared as though the shooter had followed it and then shot another shot as it turned. Now, clearly the driver had been hit by one of those shots and it veered onto the median, and it was as though they were ambushed in the middle of the night at a traffic light. And that was terrifying. Next, the detectives needed to find out who this victim was because they knew she was in trouble. Had she ran? If so, why wasn't there any blood on the ground? Did the shooter target her? Were they stalking her? Waiting for this moment when she was all alone on the freeway. This wasn't a rural area. It was highly traveled, very public. So the person who did this must have been very determined because they didn't care if someone witnessed this attack. The CSI were still combing the roadside. The detectives were locating the registration from the car. And that's when they realized it was a rental car. So they call the agency, they give them the details of the vehicle, and they are informed that it was rented that week by a 20-year-old woman named McGuigan Barroso. The agency provide officers with a copy of her driver's license and all her information, and detectives start to call hospitals from the area. They knew from the fact there was blood inside the vehicle that Megan had been injured, but they didn't believe that she was fatally injured, at least not while she was inside that car. There just wasn't enough blood. But she hadn't been admitted to any hospitals, and that wasn't a good sign. At this point, it became clear that she had been run off the road, shot at, injured, and then taken. It was imperative for them to find her as soon as possible if they wanted to find her alive. And can you imagine as a parent getting this news that your daughter's missing? And that was the way the car she was driving was left on the road. It was terrifying for both her mother and her father to think about. So I think it's a good time to tell you who McGuigan Barroso is. Megan was born on March 15th of 1981 in Ventura County, California, to her parents Suzanne and Arturo, who was known as Art Barroso. She was their baby girl, their only daughter, and from her earliest days, Megan seemed uniquely observant. She had these big, curious brown eyes, and she took in everything around her, just quietly cataloging every detail. Suzanne would laugh and say that she had a busy baby, but not in a hyperactive way, but because she just seemed to be mentally taking notes all the time, watching and waiting and fully absorbing the world around her. Art, Megan's father, was the kind of dad who made even the smallest moments count. Every day during his lunch break, he would drive home just to hold his baby girl for a few moments. And as soon as she would hear the familiar sound of the front door opening, Megan's little legs would kick because she was anticipating her dad coming through that door. Even years later, just smelling the scent of baby shampoo would bring Art back to those moments. It was the nostalgia. It was those early days, those cherished afternoons when nothing else mattered but time with his little girl. Then growing into a childhood, Megan was the kind of girl who captured attention without even trying. Her Aunt Susie always recalled a particular photograph of Megan. She was just 2 years old, standing quietly in the yard, holding a single daisy up to her face. She wasn't posing or smiling. She was just existing in the moment. She was just in her own thoughts. And that quiet intensity, that thoughtful presence that she had, became one of Megan's most defining qualities. Even though Megan was Suzanne and Art's only daughter together, she did have an older brother named Arturo Joe, or AJ, and their relationship was a bit complicated. It was the kind of sibling tension that neither one of them could really overcome. They just kind of bumped heads. AJ really felt like Megan would manipulate her mother to get more attention and draw Suzanne closer to her while pushing AJ away. Megan, meanwhile, felt that AJ was cold and distant and really unsupportive of her. A lot of times we hear that siblings get along so wonderful, but I wanted to show you that it's not always the case. And you know what? That's okay. You grow out of these things when you get older. But despite their differences, there were moments that these siblings truly bonded with. And one of them was that they did not like one of their babysitters. So at least they had that in common. And like I said, usually siblings outgrow this. From the outside, though, the Barroso family seemed picture perfect. 2 caring parents, 2 healthy children, a comfortable suburban home. But life behind closed doors is rarely that simple. Eventually, Megan's parents divorced. She was still young, and while the breakup did change her daily routine, her parents made sure that it didn't fracture their family entirely. Megan mostly stayed with her mom, but her dad made sure that he was involved in his daughter's life. He would frequently check in, and he was determined to maintain a stable presence. Suzanne, seeing her daughter's quiet, graceful nature, enrolled Megan in dance classes at 7 years old. It was actually Irish step dancing and clogging, and it quickly became Megan's passion. Dancing was where Meghan truly shined. She found a place where she could channel all of her emotions, her creativity, and all of her energy. Suzanne had also been a dancer when she was younger, and it ran in the family. And she and Meghan even performed together, mother and daughter. Their matching outfits, their dance, their shoes tapping in rhythm. It was a bond that expressed their passion and their love for one another as well, something that they bonded over. Through dance, with the Santa Rosette Cloggers, Meghan found her best friend Cricket Esther, and they were paired up early in class by Cricket's mom Carol because she thought the girls would just click, and they did. The relationship grew stronger and stronger, with afternoons filled with laughter, imagination, and countless hours on the phone talking to one another until their parents said, "You need to go." And each of them would end in a very playful argument, which was like, who should hang up? You go first. No, you go first. I remember doing that when I was a kid. But Cricket described Meghan as pure, contagious energy. Her laughter, her witty jokes, her endless optimism. And together, they choreographed dances, they performed at local events, and mentored younger dancers. Meghan wasn't just another dancer. She was someone younger girls actually genuinely admired. And as Meghan entered her teenage years, dance remained a significant part of her life, but her world slowly expanded. She attended high school alongside Cricket, and their friendship deepened even more as they navigated the complex landscape of adolescence together. Hours spent studying were often, hours talking about crushes, future dreams, school gossip, and just life. It's the kind of friendship that just feels like you're inseparable, the kind you expect to last forever. But during the summer before Meghan's senior year, life threw her an unexpected curveball. Both Suzanne and Art lost their jobs at the state hospital, where both of them were still working, and this forced Suzanne to relocate several hours north to Templeton. Meghan couldn't even think about leaving her school, her routine, her friendships all behind, especially not her best friend Cricket. And they thought about it. And Meghan moved in temporarily with Cricket and her family so she could finish high school. But life rarely follows perfectly laid out plans. I mean, I think we know that by now. And Meghan began to struggle. Her grades were dropping, the stress was mounting, and eventually she had no choice but to move north to Templeton and live with her mother. And she finished high school through home study. But when Meghan graduated, the sense of loss was still lingering. She was missing something. She already missed her senior year, the prom, and graduation with friends. It was everything that she had imagined happening for her, and it didn't. So this move, it created this painful drift as well in Meghan's friendship with Cricket. It wasn't an argument or a dramatic falling out together. They just had this natural separation. And Meghan didn't want that. She wanted to bridge that gap. So that's why she ended up moving back to Ventura County, because she was determined to build a life that reflected her independence and what she wanted to do. Meghan got her first apartment. It was a tiny place, but she was really proud of it, like we all are when we do something on our own, because it symbolized her independence and the things that she'd always wanted. She enrolled part-time at Moore Park College. She was ambitious. She was exploring possible majors and dreaming of transferring to a 4-year university, eventually wanting to study something similar to her mother, who was finishing her master's in social work. Meanwhile, she was working at Gramici, a clothing company in Oxnard, and she maintained a balance between school, work, and her social life. And in this phase, Meghan's personality and social life was blossoming. Her friends even joked that she was inseparable from her cell phone because she was always wanting to make sure she was there to answer her friend's call. She was one of the first people to always have her phone right there, ready to chat, ready to help. It sounds like many of us now, but remember, this was in the 2000s. And when we were in our 20s, I'm sure most of us did that, even if it was a landline. I mean, I had a cell phone by then. But Meghan always thought ahead, constantly. She was always looking at the worst case scenario that could happen and preparing herself for every what if. Every moment that she can think of, like, could it go this way? Could it go that way? And she had this cautious side about her. But that didn't mean she wasn't still fun and spontaneous and outgoing. And she was still even so innocent that she affectionately called her mom Mommy and had the same worn out blanket since childhood that she called her Blankie. And like most of us, she had her quirky habits as well, like eating ice cream out of coffee mugs, forgetting cartons on the counter, accidentally leaving cabinet doors wide open, guilty as charged. But those charming details reflected Meghan's gentle and slightly scattered yet pretty endearing personality. And then music was another one of her passions. Hours spent downloading tracks from Napster, and if you know, you know. And I read some comments. Some of you said, when you say that, I don't know. And I feel like you feel a little bit left out. So I'll let you in on the nostalgia. Back then, we didn't have Apple Music or Spotify or any of that. Instead, we had to basically steal music from the internet and wait hours and hours for one song to download. Yeah, that's why we took so much pride in our burned CDs that we created, even at the risk of possibly infecting our PC with a virus or the FBI knocking at our door. So that was Napster. And Megan would carefully create these playlists of her favorite songs, and she could lose herself in the moody Radiohead songs. One of her favorites was How to Disappear Completely, which is haunting looking back. But she also liked to sing along to cheerful songs like Wham! And Billy Idol. Music was her emotional outlet, a way that she could capture her feelings without having to say anything. Megan remained extremely close to her family this entire time. She cherished her visits with her dad, Art, and she loved spending time with her newest sibling, a little baby, Christian, from her dad's new relationship. And even though there was a 20-year age difference, Megan was so happy at being a big sister. She would drive to her dad's just to spend her lunch breaks holding Christian and just sharing these precious moments, the sibling connection. And let me know if you have a big age gap. My siblings are 15 and 17 years younger than me. And of course, I just had a new baby and I have a 13-year-old age gap between my other daughter. But let me know if you do as well. I feel very connected even to my siblings that have the age gap. And Megan was very attached to her siblings as well, and she was deeply connected to her mother, Suzanne. Suzanne even gave Megan a clatter ring, and this is a symbol of love and loyalty, and I'm sure you've seen this before. It's one of two hands holding a heart with a crown on top. I've seen them in movies. I've heard about them being called friendship rings. I've heard them called promise rings, that you flip it one way and it means that you're single, and flip it the other way and it means that you're taken. Let me know if you've ever heard of this ring, if you wear it, and what it means to you. These were very popular, especially in the early 2000s, and Megan wore hers every day. This was a reminder of her mother and their connection that they had. When her mom gifted it to her, she said, "When you look at this ring, remember how much you are loved." And Megan never left home without it on her finger. Once she was back in Ventura County, she was back into her old routine with her friend Cricket, and it was like they were never apart. They were still the best of friends, talking every day, hanging out for hours. But then she built some new friendships, including her friend Lindsay Gross, who described Megan beautifully, a real-life blend of Snow White and Marissa Tomei. The soft, light skin, the dark hair, plus the witty humor. Megan was someone who could just lift your mood just by entering the room. She was beautiful with a big personality. And by early July 2001, Megan's life felt in control. She was independent, she was surrounded by friends and family, and she had clear plans for her future. She was approaching her 21st birthday, and she was ready for everything that life had in store. Kind of. Because no one, especially Megan, could have known that everything she carefully built, everything she loved, was about to be tragically interrupted. Her presence, her humor, her reassuring voice on the other end of countless calls would soon become something that everyone desperately missed. But at the beginning of that summer in 2001, she was simply Megan, young, happy, and surrounded by friends. Before she vanished on that roadside, she had been enjoying 4th of July celebrations, completely unaware that within hours, her world would change forever. That is what makes this case terrifying. That's why I'm talking about this case, because it's how quickly things can change. When Art got the news, it wasn't a phone call. The detectives were merely confirming that the number they had on file was his. They showed up at his house to deliver the news in person. And Art felt his heart drop immediately. Detective Barrios described the scene that they'd found, and he did it carefully because this was a sensitive thing to say to a parent. But he had to tell him the truth. The bullet holes, the blood, the unsettling silence of Megan's car left running but empty. Art was instantly in a panic, in disbelief, and in terror. This was Megan. She was responsible. She was reliable. This seemed way too confusing. Why would anyone want to hurt Megan? His mind was racing. He was searching desperately for explanations that were less horrifying than the most obvious one. Her mother, Susan, received the same news and the same shock. Megan was her whole world. Not only her daughter, but her best friend. So that fear hit her really hard, and she felt it physically. She was nauseous, and she was realizing that her desperate attempts to keep calling Megan's phone over and over again that went unanswered, this was why. They had been looking for Megan since the night before, because she usually kept in touch, and even an hour without a message from her was unusual. Lindsay had slept in longer than usual after their late night July 4th celebration, and she reached for her phone, half asleep, expecting to see a quick text or a missed call from Megan, but there was nothing. And initially, Lindsay just shrugged it off. Megan probably slept in like she had. But when afternoon rolled around and Megan still hadn't responded, that casual confidence started to feel like concern. Detectives wasted no time contacting Megan's friends, piecing together her last known movements. Art and Suzanne told the detectives that Megan's social circle was tight. It was made up of longtime friends and people she trusted, and no one that would ever put her life in danger. They knew she had planned staying out with Lindsay the night before, so detectives decided to start there. They made contact with Megan's worried friend and told her everything they knew so far. When Lindsay heard this, she screamed. She told them she wanted to help them any way that she possibly could, because she knew time was of the essence. So she recounted their entire day. July 4th, 2001 started exactly like you would expect a summer holiday in Southern California would. Warm, clear skies, crowded streets, lots of celebrations. Megan spent the entire afternoon at Lindsay's parents' house. They were hosting a backyard barbecue, and Lindsay explained that it was only her mom, her dad, her aunt, uncle, and her grandparents in attendance beside Megan. It was very low-key. And when asked what she was wearing, Lindsay remembered that Megan was in white capri pants, a fitted green t-shirt, sandals, and an army green colored bomber jacket with an orange lining from the Gap, a white and blue purse, and that distinctive clotter ring that she always wore. And there was nothing out of the ordinary about that afternoon. Lindsay's house was a place where Megan always felt comfortable, almost like it was her second home. She'd been there so often that she didn't even knock or ring the doorbell. She would just walk right in, and she just joined the festivities that day. Outside in the backyard, there were hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill, watermelon slices piled high, bowls of potato salad, and chocolate chip ice cream that was already softening under the sun. Lindsay recalled Megan grabbing a burger and immediately doing something that made her smile because it was just so Megan. It was something unconventional, which she was, and she was always herself, and she was proudly adding fresh avocado slices. I mean, I think it's pretty normal, but Lindsay had to laugh. And the two friends were sitting side by side on lawn chairs, talking about Lindsay's upcoming trip she was taking the very next day to Northern California. They were just playfully teasing each other. They were talking about random things, just a typical best friend banter. The detectives asked if anything eventful occurred, and the only thing Lindsay could think of was Megan pulling her aside in confidence and telling her, "I started my period." And she's like, "Oh, it's the worst time. I'm wearing white pants." Lindsay told her, "Don't worry. There's only a small stain on them." They went inside. Megan took off her capris and her underwear and put on a pair of Lindsay's sweatpants while Lindsay ran to get some spray and wash stain remover. And the girls gently scrubbed the capris and the underwear, which Lindsay remembered teasing Megan about, calling them granny panties. It was just a funny moment between friends, nothing unusual at the time, just part of their day. But she was telling them every little detail because she didn't know what would end up being important. And I'm going to let you know something right now. That detail about her undergarments would become important, and that is why I am mentioning it. Even though the girls were having a great time at Lindsay's, they already made plans for the evening. So as it got later into the afternoon, they wrapped up what they were doing with their visit with Lindsay's family, and Lindsay's friends called. She had known them since high school, and they planned to go to a house party on Silver Strand Beach. They were going to watch the fireworks display over the water in Oxnard. And even though it was a 45-minute drive, it would be way better over there than inland in Newbury, where Lindsay's house was. The houses on the ocean were big, and the parties were always a lot of fun. Plus, they didn't have to worry about driving because they were getting picked up by two of Lindsay's guy friends. In that case, Megan left the car she was renting at Lindsay's house. The car that she usually drove was in the shop that week, and they arrived at Lindsay's friend John's house on the beach. Now, this wasn't a huge get-together. There were maybe 10 of them all together, including Lindsay, Megan, and Lindsay's two friends, Carissa and Chelsea. The house was decorated for the 4th of July, and the vibe was relaxed but fun. And Megan didn't know anyone, but Lindsay knew John and her two friends, and they talked, they lit sparklers, they drank some beer. But John had a bit more to drink, and it showed. You know, when you can tell that someone should have been cut off a little while ago, that was John. He pulled Lindsay aside and he asked, "Can I be introduced to your friend, Megan?" Clearly he was interested, so of course she did. Lindsay knew, though, there was no way Megan would be interested in John. But of course, Megan was friendly and cordial, thanking him for allowing them to hang out at the house and hosting the celebration. But it wasn't long before John was pulling Lindsay aside one more time, and this time asking if she thought he had a chance with Megan. Lindsay almost said no way, like immediately. But she just explained to detectives, at least, that Megan had really high standards. She wasn't the type of girl to casually hook up with someone, and Lindsay knew exactly what John was interested in that night. Lindsay was protective over Megan. She already started getting a little annoyed by the fact that John had been flirting so hard with her, kind of bombarding her. It was a little much. Megan was too nice. She wasn't going to tell someone to get lost. But Lindsay let John know. Don't waste your time. Just don't. She won't be interested. And the four girls, Megan, Lindsay, Carissa, and Chelsea, walked out to the back of the house and down to the beach around 8:30 p.m. to watch the fireworks show. And in the distance, they saw two police officers on horseback coming their way. Megan didn't even hesitate. She went right up and she asked the officers what the name of the horses were. It was Zeke and Dakota. They were calm and friendly, and the cops even let Megan and Lindsay pet them. And they stood there asking the cops questions about the horses and making lighthearted jokes. And that's who Megan was. That was part of her personality. She was outgoing. And then they walked down to the water, and they took their shoes off and they walked on the shore, letting the waves come up to their ankles. Then they sat down on the sand together, and Lindsay described it as a beautiful moment when everyone was just quietly staring up into the sky, taking in the gorgeous sight of all the lights over the sparkling water. There's no way anyone could have expected what would happen that night. It was such a contrast to this happy, festive atmosphere. The fireworks ended, and things were winding down around 10:30 p.m. And after that, they left John's house with the same two guys that drove them over there. But they weren't ready to call it a night. So they stopped at one of the guys' houses in Newberry Park to make mint chocolate chip milkshakes. And they hung out till around 2 a.m. Then the guys dropped Lindsay and Megan off back at Lindsay's house, where Megan had parked her green Pontiac Sunfire rental car. Lindsay told Megan, just spend the night, just stay over. That's because it was almost 3 a.m. by this time. But Megan said it was fine. She had to work the next day, and she just wanted to go home. We've all been there. We're just like, you know what? I think I'm okay. I think I just want to be in my own bed. But Lindsay was going out of town the next day, and they wouldn't see each other for a few days. So instead of the normal wave goodbye, Megan ran up and she jumped on top of Lindsay. She gave her this big hug. But when she was doing that, she spilled Lindsay's purse on the ground. And as she was picking everything up, Megan accidentally held on to Lindsay's phone. It was a habit. She didn't notice, she probably tucked it under her arm. We've done that so many times before and just walked away. But as she drove, it didn't take long for Lindsay to realize, and she called it from her house phone to let Megan know. Megan picked up Lindsay's phone at this point and told her, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll bring it right back to you." Now, a few minutes later, Megan called again. She had taken a wrong turn. She briefly got lost, and Lindsay was outside patiently waiting for her to reappear, for her headlights to come around that corner, and at 2:45 a.m., Megan finally returned. She handed Lindsay the phone back. Megan told Lindsay to have a great trip, bring back some earrings for her if you remember, and added, "Kiss a redwood for me," because she was going to see the redwoods. Then Lindsay waved goodbye as she watched Megan get back in her rental car and drive away, completely unaware that she had just witnessed the last time she would ever see her best friend. I can't even begin to imagine that reality. It's devastating. And Lindsay felt guilty because she kept thinking, what if I hadn't called her from my phone? If she hadn't turned back around, then maybe she wouldn't have crossed paths with a monster. And I say this because no one in Megan's life said that anyone they knew would want to hurt her. So the only thing they could imagine was that some psycho attacked her and was probably holding her captive. But the detectives weren't so sure. The John guy sounded a little sketchy. He was too pushy, too interested in Megan. He'd know where she was going that night, and maybe he followed her. So they immediately track him down and they speak to him. John admitted he thought Megan was attractive and he was interested in getting to know her, but he firmly stated that he never left the party that night. It was held at his house, and multiple guests backed up his story, placing him there throughout the night and into the next morning. Detectives conducted a thorough background check on him, and they found nothing linking John to Megan's disappearance. In the end, he was ruled out as a suspect. Now, this was still July 5th, the same day that Megan's rental car was found early that morning, and now additional law enforcement personnel and volunteers joined the search effort. The perimeter was widened, the teams were going into fields, ditches, and roadside areas, and beyond the initial crime scene now, and they couldn't find any clues. Canine units arrived. A tracking dog named Duro sniffed Megan's rental car, quickly locating the scent from the abandoned sandal. But then oddly, the dog just paused, like he was confused, because the scent just vanished, and there was no more indication of Megan going anywhere. And this meant to them that she was grabbed, probably right out of the driver's seat, and taken away in another vehicle. I mean, she did have a swipe mark on the side of her car. So putting all the clues together, it seemed like someone was trying to get her to pull over at some point, and she wouldn't. So they went so far as to shoot her car to get her to stop? That sounded really extreme. And speaking of extreme, when Detective Barrios looked at the shell casings, he realized they were green-tinted shells unlike any he had seen before, and near a patch of broken glass lay a metal rod. Now, they didn't know what this was at first. They were collecting everything, and they realized that this is a cleaning rod that you typically find in a rifle case or in a rifle itself. It wasn't the type of thing that you just find dropped casually on the ground. And now they realized they were dealing with someone that was using what they believed was an AK-47. This is in the family of assault rifles, and I'm sure you have seen these before. They are intended for combat, for soldiers. This wasn't a handgun. It was used for speed and precision, for hunting. And it was becoming more and more clear that poor Megan had been hunted. She had been precisely attacked with intention and with violence. Detectives knew they weren't dealing with an amateur. They believed this person had done this before. Now, helicopters were flying overhead, and they were using infrared technology, and they were scanning the terrain for body heat, but nothing came up. Detectives soon discovered something, though. Megan's rental, her Pontiac, was equipped with an event data recorder. This is a crash data retrieval system. It's basically a black box. It captures data from this car, how fast it was going, how fast it was traveling at different times, how far, and for how long, when it stopped. And this was a feature that was designed to capture the moments before a collision and the moments afterward. It was installed for airbag manufacturers, automakers, and even a rental car agency so they can keep track of drivers and incidents that occur. When they looked at what the car was doing right before it landed on the median, the data revealed that 5 seconds before impact, the car had been stopped at the off-ramp, probably at that red light, before suddenly flooring the gas pedal to 100% throttle. She was stomping on the gas. It was like pedal to the metal, speeding away, but we know she didn't get far. After a sharp turn, the car began to swerve and landed on top of the median. Megan was in a panic. It supported the theory that someone began shooting at her while she was stopped. The casings were in that location. The bullet holes were in her front windshield, where her head would have been, and 2 more at both of her sides. They needed an accident and ballistics reconstructive specialist at this point to come in and examine these bullet holes. So Senior Deputy Godfrey with the Ventura County Sheriff's Office conducted a detailed walkthrough of this location. He was taking appropriate measurements and calculations, and he recorded where the shattered glass was across the roadway. He marked the location of the shell casings and the bullet fragments. Where Megan's sandal was, it was 3 feet from where the driver's door had been, and how far the rifle cleaning rod was found. When using laser analysis, another doctor, Dr. Jim Roberts, was able to pinpoint the trajectory of each and every bullet, which I have to say is pretty cool. This was very high tech. They arranged these red laser beams in the holes and are able to calculate the height, the speed, and the direction they come from. Crazy. And I do have some pictures to show you what I mean and why I'm saying it's so high tech. I'm sure by now the technology is even more advanced. This was 2001 after all. But you can see how these holes were in the Pontiac, and it's frightening to think that Megan was inside, literally dodging these bullets. But this showed, with the presence of where the bloodstains were, that one of those bullets struck Megan somewhere in her abdomen or her chest area. And detectives used that data to build a computer animation of the likely sequence of events. You can see that 2 of the bullets went straight through the front windshield and to the left of the driver's seat, probably missing Megan by just inches. Another one went to the left of the driver's seat, and 1 hit the hood. Then there were 2 on either side of the car. The computer technology showed that the bullet on the passenger side was most likely the first shot. From the animation, the scientists believed someone in another vehicle that was taller than the Pontiac sideswiped Megan on the driver's side, attempting to push her off of the road. When that didn't work, they drove to the passenger side and they shot at her to try to get her to stop. But she kept going. They believe at that point the attacker sped far enough ahead of Megan, and she probably thought this was some crazy fit of road rage and maybe it would be over. But instead, the calculations proved that the shooter positioned themselves 60 feet from where Megan was stopped at that light. And as she came off that freeway, she made a complete stop 5 seconds before impact. That black box recorded that. 4 shots were fired as the attacker came closer to Megan, now believed to be on foot, and he approached her car, shooting into the windshield, but he missed. And Megan floored her car to try to escape. But as she passed the shooter, he shot one more time into the driver's side door, and this bullet struck Megan, causing her to swerve and land on the median. The blood inside showed that Megan had leaned over her center console and was most likely trying to reach inside her purse to get her cell phone. She grabbed a hold of it. They know that because of the blood, but it came out of her grasp and landed on the floorboard. This is why there was blood on the zipper of her purse. It was opened, and there was blood on the phone, and it probably landed just out of reach. Her seatbelt buckle also had blood on it, showing that she attempted to release the strap to escape or to reach over for the phone as it was laying on the floor. But with the driver's window shattered, the attacker was able to unlock her door and grab her and pull her out and carry her back to their vehicle, explaining why there was no blood trail. If this doesn't terrify you, I don't know what would, because this is so sudden and so scary, it can happen to anyone. And the detectives had theories as to why someone would do something like this, most of which were anger and intoxication, but they didn't disclose any of that publicly. After they were finished reconstructing the scene, they towed the Pontiac to the crime lab for additional testing, and I'm sure you could imagine the news of a college student run off the road, shot at with an AK-47 and kidnapped would make headlines. And the news was traveling fast. Everyone wanted to know if authorities had any leads to catch this person because they were still out there. And of course, to find Megan. I'm sure you know that the first 24 to 72 hours are the most crucial time, and it was ticking by. Officers set up roadblocks and they were questioning drivers, hoping someone had seen or heard something that could lead to an answer. This was vital to create a timeline. At least 8 people who were stopped at that checkpoint said they saw something in the early morning hours of July 5th while driving in that same area. There were different accounts from each one of these people, but no one decided to stop. One person saw the car on the median at around 3:55 a.m., which would have been just minutes before the security guard came over and called 911. That witness said he just drove by. He saw the car, he saw the door open, he figured it's a drunk driver. They ran off after hitting the median. And the earliest sighting was at 2:55 a.m., and that was crucial. That witness did more than anyone else besides the security guard. The guy saw the Pontiac pulled over on the side of the road. He got out of his car to check and see if someone was hurt. He didn't see anyone, but he noticed the sandal on the road and the broken glass. And like most witnesses, he concluded it was a drunk driver that fled the scene, so he left. So no one reported the car that night. Would you? I wondered, because considering I'm pretty sure we all watch a lot of true crime, I guess I would at least report that a vehicle had been crashed on the side of the road. But no one seemed to notice the bullet holes. And I think that would have been a huge red flag, but most witnesses said they were just driving by quickly and they caught a glimpse of the car. Detectives publicly made a plea for tips. They promised the family that they were going to find Megan, and they were hoping someone somewhere had something to say. Megan's face was appearing everywhere on the evening news, on flyers, and there was even a dedicated tip line that was constantly ringing. But no tips really emerged from that. And this was frustrating. As the hours went on and then the days went on, the absence of any concrete answers was torture for Megan's loved ones. Every phone call that they received was full of anxiety. Every update without a resolution was just agony for them. It wasn't just the silence. Art was working closely with the police. He was doing everything that he could to help find his daughter and the person who attacked her. But he worried constantly, not just for Megan, but for other people, because if someone was capable of this, He thought it was likely they'd done it before and they would do it again. Art was also forced to do this balancing act because he was trying to help with the search for Meghan, but still care for his other 4 children, 2 of whom were young enough to grasp the fear, but not fully aware of the reality of the situation, that their sister might not be coming home. Every night, they would ask questions that Art didn't really have the answers to. Questions about where their big sister was when she was coming back. They looked to their father for strength and he was trying to deliver it, but he was feeling broken himself. To him, the only thing that mattered was to keep hoping. No matter how bad things got, he made it clear that Meghan would remain alive in his heart and his mind until someone proved otherwise. They were not going to give up on her. But if Art stopped for a minute and started to think, the fear would just wash over him. Because learning that his daughter had come under fire from an AK-47 brought him back. He had memories that he fought to forget because he was a young sergeant in Vietnam and he had heard the terrifying sound of that style rifle many times before, and he knew the feeling of being scared that he might not survive. Just 20 years old back then, the same age Meghan was on the night she was last seen, Art vividly remembered lying in the dirt with bullets overhead and praying that he'd somehow make it out alive. And now, decades later, that same horrifying sound was echoing through his mind again, but this time it was his daughter, facing it alone. And no matter how hard he tried to push away those images, they just kept coming back. Of Meghan trapped in her car, with bullets shattering glass around her, and he knew all too well the helplessness, the desperation, especially when you're faced with something you cannot control. But what hurt him the most was wondering about whether she called out for him, whether she thought about her father in those moments. That made him wish more than ever that he could have been there to protect his daughter. And when I read that, I could not help but get teary-eyed because it's painful to think that we can't always protect the people we love because life is so unpredictable and it's so fragile. And that reality is hard to accept sometimes. Plus, the weight of constant attention from the media that added another layer to all of this. Calls from reporters were coming into the house, and they would catch him off guard. And during one live TV interview, when he didn't have a chance to really know what was going to be said, a reporter mentioned the bullet holes in Meghan's car. And even though he already knew about this, it had been privately shared with him, he now heard it repeated casually, broadcasted for everyone else to hear. And that made it real. And I think sometimes, these families, they're now a public spectacle. They're now being talked about. People are shocked and there's these stories. And here we talk about these stories on this channel. And I don't think everyone thinks about that. I realize we're human, we're curious, we want to learn about these stories. But when you are, and even late breaking, especially when they haven't even been solved, just remember that there are people hurting, people who have lived through that pain. So I do try my best not to forget that. And behind the scenes, detectives were still working nonstop because this was a mystery. It was even a mystery why someone would target Meghan. Every aspect of her life was being scrutinized, her friendships, her relationships, her college activities, her social habits. But nothing unusual surfaced. Meghan wasn't involved in risky behaviors. She didn't have a jealous former boyfriend or even current one. No disputes. She was a college student focused on her future, studying hard, holding down a part-time job, and just enjoying the summer with her friends. Detectives found themselves confronted by just the randomness of this crime. An ordinary girl who was attacked and vanished without warning on a short drive home from a friend's house. If the first witness said that they saw her at 2:55, that means it was only 10 minutes after she left Lindsay's house. And the public interest just kept getting more and more intense because of the media updates. Tips were pouring in by the hundreds at this point, and they were overwhelming the detectives. One tip in particular piqued their interest. An anonymous caller claimed that they witnessed something suspicious on the night Meghan vanished. A man was forcing a body resembling Meghan's into a trunk of a burgundy sedan in the remote Santa Susana Mountains. Now, those mountains had a sinister reputation. They were a known dumping ground for victims of violence. And the possibility that this might have been Meghan really intensified this investigation. Immediately, there was a new bulletin released. It was pleading for anyone who might have seen a burgundy car that evening to come forward. And detectives searched that location, and they combed through brush and ravines. But after days, that tip went nowhere. It had been an unrelated event, and still, the investigators knew that it couldn't have been ignored. It did feel very disappointing because they felt like they were set back now because Megan was still missing. And every second mattered because she could still be alive. And as the days passed with no fresh leads, this case was beginning to get stale. They had to go in a different direction. And sure, it could have been a random road rage attack. But what if it wasn't? Megan had just started a new job on May 21st. She was a production purchasing assistant at that retail job. And since that was something different that she added to her ordinary routine, the detectives decided to expand the search to her workplace. They sifted through emails that she printed out, 10 pages of seemingly ordinary exchanges, but they were combing through them. And then a reminder note that was left taped to her computer screen. She was probably just reminding herself to do a task, but that would never be completed. Personal items were taken from her desk, handwritten documents, signatures, scribbled notes. Every scrap of paper was scrutinized to see if there was like a hidden meaning or some kind of overlooked threat. Detectives were studying her handwriting carefully. They were seeing, like, does it reveal stress or a state of mind? I mean, they were trying to find anything that could show that someone wanted to hurt her. But despite hours that they spent analyzing those everyday items, nothing came out. Megan's workplace offered no clues, only reminders about how fast her life changed. Meanwhile, as search teams expanded their efforts even more into the rugged remote terrain all around Ventura County, an unexpected discovery was uncovered. In a steep ravine of Grimes Canyon, a researcher spotted something really unsettling. It ended up being a human skull. It was weathered and it was partially obscured under a whole bunch of brush, but still, they wondered, could it be Megan? Now, they carefully examined the skull, and the medical examiner quickly confirmed that the remains were a male, so this wasn't Megan. But what they did find out was really frightening. Now, this was from an unrelated situation, an unrelated case. It was a fatal accident a year earlier involving another missing person. But what it made them realize was that these remote canyons had hidden secrets, and Megan's was still waiting to be uncovered. Her secret was still out there. And I wonder how many places like this are hiding things that are never found. It's actually chilling to think about that. Moore Park, where Megan lived, had bragged for a long time about its reputation of being the safest city in Ventura County. And her dad thought that might be the reason why Ventura County Sheriff's Department seemed like they didn't want to draw any more attention to Megan's case. Now, you think that that's what they would want, national attention, because Art planned a TV interview on The Early Show, hoping that would bring in even more leads. However, on July 16th, the producer called him and told him the segment was canceled. Why? Because apparently a detective from the sheriff's office contacted the producer and refused to take part in anything related to Megan's case. They said that there were no benefits that would come from going national. They wanted to keep the tips coming in locally and not be flooded with false leads. Fair enough, I guess. But as a parent, not acceptable. In their point of view, the sheriff's office thought it was too much too soon. They wanted to fully exhaust all of their resources before expanding to more outreach. And I don't know if that really makes sense to me, but to them, I feel like maybe they just didn't want information to get out because the investigation was still fresh. What if they released too much information and they didn't have anything that they could kind of get the suspects or the killer to admit, right? Because sometimes they like to keep that under wraps. But on Tuesday, July 17th, the sheriff's office announced they were going to offer a $25,000 reward for information leading to Megan's whereabouts. And a website, meganbarroso.org, was launched at the end of the month. Now the community could get updates, they could donate, and they could support the search efforts. I found an archived version of that website, and it included a few pictures of Megan, the details around her disappearance, the reward, and the contact information for tips. They also released an official description of Megan and what she was wearing the night she vanished or was taken. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds. She has shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a green short-sleeved t-shirt, white capri pants with a green bomber jacket with orange lining, and brown sandals. but we know her sandals were found at the scene. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office formed a task force, and they were dedicated to McGuigan's case. It was made of 20 officers who were closely monitoring leads, and they were actively involved in finding her. And each one of them had their own specialty, whether that was a canine officer, a homicide detective, or deputies from the Major Crime Squad. And in addition, Sergeant Lorenzen wanted a fresh perspective on the case. And there had been a forensic psychological profiler that was gaining a lot of recognition at the time. Her name was Sharon Hagan, and she was the only recognized criminal investigative profiler in the state of California in 2001. She had a reputation for working on complex and high-profile crimes, ones that baffled even the most experienced detectives. And just to put things in perspective, she worked for the Department of Justice and ended up consulting on the Lacey Peterson case. And now she appears on a number of true crime shows like The Zodiac, American Murder, and Very Scary People that dives into the minds of really twisted criminals like serial killers John Wayne Gacy and Charles Manson. But back in 2001, Sharon had already been profiling criminals for over a decade. She was actually self-taught, which is pretty impressive. She taught herself criminal investigation and crime scene analysis. And then she went on to study with the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crimes. Later, she did obtain a doctorate in clinical psychology, and she assisted on numerous cases for prosecutors and law enforcement agencies. She often helped pinpoint what kind of perpetrator they were looking for, and that would lead to their capture. But she didn't just work on California cases. She was highly sought after all over the country. So Sergeant Lorenzen was grateful to have her on board to help them put together a profile of the person who might have attacked and taken Megan. And by this time, they knew that the likelihood of her still being alive was slim. The focus was now on finding her and getting justice. Criminal investigative analysts like Sharon typically come in on cases like Megan's when detectives don't have any suspects at all. And Sharon will analyze the crime scene and the evidence, or the lack thereof, and any witness testimony, and they'll create a list of characteristics, including psychological factors, behavioral patterns, and motives of a person likely to commit the type of crime they're investigating. For example, to make it simple, let's say there's a bunch of burglaries happening in a particular part of town, and they all have similar characteristics. Like maybe they're always on the second story of an apartment building during work hours from 9 to 5, and no one ever sees it happening. And the person gains access through a sliding glass door on the balcony, and they leave a signature object behind every time. Well, a profiler may conclude that the offender is not employed at a regular job since they have time to break in from 9 to 5 when people are at work, and they're experienced because they get in and out without being seen. They're young and fit because they climb up a building to get inside, and they're skilled and experienced. And they probably want to make a name for themselves by leaving something behind. So you can probably see how this could help narrow down who police would look for or look at first. If they have a list of potential suspects and 10 of them work a 9 to 5, they could skip over them for the time being and invest more time and focus on the ones that wouldn't be at work during the burglaries. This is a profile, in the simplest terms. This helps utilize limited time wisely and focus on more likely suspects. I'm sure you can see the value in that. So Sharon wanted to understand what kind of person would commit a crime like this. And you are all really smart when it comes to clues. I bet you already caught on that this offender is bold. They're driven by something that feels much greater than the risk to their freedom, and possibly had a sexual motive. Why? Well, Megan's young. She's a beautiful female all alone and vulnerable in the middle of the night. This area was public and frequently traveled. He got out of his vehicle and shot a high-powered rifle from the middle of the street. All of that right there shows very specific characteristics. But Sharon was going to go way deeper. She was especially well-versed in profiling sexually deviant criminals. Most recently, she had been diligently completing a profile for the elusive Simi Valley rapist, a man who was still on the loose and committed a series of rapes and kidnappings that began in 1996 in Simi Valley, California. There were at least 10 of these crimes that had a very similar pattern to the point where they were deemed to be committed by the same person, even though they hadn't tracked him down yet, but they felt like they were getting closer and closer. And this kind of reminds me of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. That's the kind of guy that Sharon was helping track down in Simi Valley. And now she was using her expertise to try to help find Megan's attacker. Sharon examines everything, and she begins to hone in on the motive someone would have to harm someone like McGuigan. On one hand, someone could assume that Sharon was a bit biased or has tunnel vision because she works on so many cases that deal with women being violated. But she begins to believe that that was what this man was after, that he saw McGuigan driving alone that night and wanted to have his way with her, but the detectives pushed back. They were going more with the road rage scenario. Someone drunk that took something McGuigan did on the road the wrong way. But Sharon saw similarities to other cases she worked on that involved fantasy and obsession. The taking part, the fact that McGuigan was taken from the scene, if it was just to get back at her for running into his car, let's say, why would you take her? Sharon's perspective was to have his way with her, but the detectives weren't so sure, and one reason was because men who commit these violation type of crimes usually do everything in their power to keep it low-key. They sneak around, they wear disguises, they enter and get out quickly after they have their way with them, and the one big thing, they don't usually kill. We're not saying in every single situation, but typically if the motive is merely physical, they don't take a person's life. They don't just come to a roadway to find their victims either. They break into their homes at night. But Sharon argued this offender was leaving the scene with the victim, McGuigan, to seek privacy to commit the act. Now, this theory offered a potential direction to take the case because they could look into all the offenders that live in that area, for example, bring them in one by one to see if they had an alibi for that night. But the detectives thought the one detail made it hard to reconcile, and that was the weapon. It was big, it was loud, and it was destructive. The opposite of what an offender like that would want. They typically use methods that allow them to assert control without drawing attention to themselves. McGuigan's attack suggested rage, chaos, and someone that was so angry, they didn't care about being seen. So it contradicted everything they knew about perpetrators of those violation-type crimes. And I can't say the word, but I think you know what I mean. But Sharon knew more. She was the expert in this category, and she was immersed in the details of the Simi Valley cases. One happened to a young woman named Joanne just 2 years before McGuigan was attacked. Joanne was talking to her boyfriend on the phone late one night when chaos shattered her quiet room. An unknown man burst into her door wearing a mask and blinding her with a beam of a flashlight. He shouted that he was the police, and Joanne barely had time to process what was happening before the intruder got control. He ordered her to lie face down, demanded that she remove her clothes, and quickly give him her car keys. He had a knife. He covered her head with a blanket, and he warned her to get in her car or she would die. She did what he said, and she was forced to drive to an isolated park where there was already a carpet on the ground. This meant that he had planned this. So let me break this down. Sharon was showing that sure, Joanne was initially attacked at her home, but she was taken to a second location, which is actually not uncommon. And if you don't know the rule, detectives will tell you not to let an attacker take you to a second location. The reason why is you're more likely to never be found if they take you away from familiar surroundings where you have connections. So it was true that these type of offenders can remove someone and take them to a more private area. But detectives also knew that this Joanne victim was returned to her home by the perpetrator, and she wasn't killed. She wasn't even harmed. So that didn't add up to McGuigan's case. However, at this point, even though it had already been a couple weeks since McGuigan vanished, no one knew if she was dead. They knew she was harmed, but she could very well still be alive. So that meant Sharon's theories still held some weight. Detectives had to at least look into the potential that McGuigan's attack was related to a man who wanted to have his way with her. So they looked for any recent cases of women being attacked and violated, and they found one that just occurred on July 10th, less than a week after McGuigan was attacked. So stay with me, because I know investigations are tedious, especially when you're listening to a deep dive like this. So there's a lot. But they had to look into leads that were in that time frame, and this one stood out. Interestingly, Sharon was already looking into that same crime because she thought the MO had some of the characteristics that matched the profile of the Simi Valley cases. I'm going to tell you about what happened and see if you can find something significant, because it was kind of hard to tell if this crime was related to McGuigan's. The most recent victim was a 22-year-old named Donna. In her case, it had just gotten dark when Donna decided to walk the familiar 1.5 mile route to her boyfriend's house. She had walked this path plenty of times before. She always felt safe, but that night was different. Halfway through her journey, without any warning, someone lunged from the shadows of the nearby bushes and they pressed a cold blade against her neck and said, "Don't scream." He demanded money. She said she didn't have any. She was terrified. Then he ordered her to toss her phone into the bushes, making sure that she couldn't call for help. It was dark, but there were streetlights on, and Donna noticed that this man was dressed entirely in dark clothing and gloves, and nearby she saw his truck, a Ford Ranger with pale beige interior, idling. Before she could figure out what was happening, this man quickly bound her ankles tightly with duct tape and secured her wrists in metal handcuffs. And then he forced her into his vehicle from the driver's side door. Inside the confined space of the truck, this stranger began making demands. And when Donna hesitated, she was shaking and frightened. His calm voice turned into anger. She remembered how harsh his commands became whenever she failed to follow through on what he demanded. And she finally had to comply or get hurt. And when she stopped, he would ask her why she wasn't continuing. And I don't even need to say this, but she was extremely terrified. And after briefly driving, he pulled up to a house, guided Donna inside, and he took off the tape and pushed her toward a dark bedroom. Donna noticed the windows were blacked out with some kind of curtains, and she was in this isolated room and commanded to undress, and then she had to endure another horrifying act. And after he was done, he changed his tone, almost like he was complimenting Donna at this point, saying that her boyfriend was a really lucky guy, calling her beautiful, and that he regretted they had to meet under these awful conditions rather than somewhere else, when he was the one that created such a horrific circumstance. And yet another unsettling shift of his personality, he began trying to comfort Donna, even offering a Dr. Pepper, and casually promising that, "You know what, I'll take you back before you have to work in the morning," as though nothing was out of the ordinary. That's really disturbing. And finally, he covered her face with a sweatshirt, guided her back to his truck, and drove around for about 45 minutes, and Donna thought he was going to kill her. But they finally returned to those bushes where she had been taken. He got out, and he searched through the bushes for her phone using a flashlight. And then he began asking her questions, all about Cal State, the college she went to, and that made her really worried. She wondered, had they met before? Had their paths crossed without her knowing it? When he demanded her address, she gave her boyfriend's address instead, and he got angry. And he confronted her, pointing out, "That's not the address on your license." And just before he actually released her, he stopped short of reaching her boyfriend's house, and he leaned in with a really disturbing request. He wanted a goodbye kiss. Donna just ran. She went right into her boyfriend's house and immediately dialed 911. She spent hours recounting every vivid detail to investigators: his face, his vehicle, the room, his garage. So tell me, did you catch any similarities in Donna and Megan's cases? Sharon thought there were. The only one that I could confidently say was that they were both taken. Detectives decided not to link this attack to Megan, but Sharon did add this one to her list of potential Simi Valley victims because of the location it happened, the age of the victim, the way that she looked. All the Simi Valley victims were petite, young, and had dark hair. And then there were other characteristics that she was familiar with in the other cases that she studied. But Megan's case was still going cold. But I won't make you wait much longer, I promise, because soon there would be a huge break in her case. And it wasn't because the detectives or even Sharon caught a lead. No. It was an arrest that occurred in another county due to a man calling the police and saying that his neighbor had just burglarized his home. This was on July 26th, and only 2.5 weeks from when Megan was attacked. The man that was arrested was 31-year-old Vincent Sanchez. His roommate, Josh Reno, was being questioned about what he knew about the burglary and any weapons that Vincent had access to. And that's when an AK-47 was mentioned. It wasn't Vincent's, though. It belonged to his roommate Josh, but he told officers that Vincent could have accessed it. He kept it in a gun case underneath his bed in his room. The officers asked if Josh would let them see the rifle. He obliged. They drove over to the house that he shared with Vincent and their other roommate, Steve, and Josh opened up the gun case, showed the officers the AK-47. The bullets were housed in green-tinted shell casings, just like the ones found at the intersection where Megan's rental car was found. But this arrest and search were happening in a totally different county. These officers weren't even aware of Megan's case. They were investigating the burglary and taking inventory of items that could have been stolen from the neighbors, like a weapon. I'm just letting you in on the connections, so it already makes sense to you when you hear the bombshell and how crazy this all came together. The officers leave. Vincent is sitting in a jail cell waiting to be officially charged for robbing his neighbor, but they were still missing all the items that were allegedly taken: jewelry, potential weapons, and other valuables. So that's why the officers were asking Josh about certain items in the home, but nothing was uncovered at the time. However, that night, Vincent calls Josh from jail and he asks him, "Can you do me a huge favor? Get rid of a bag that I threw in the recycling bin outside the house." This was somewhere police hadn't looked. The garbage pickup wasn't scheduled for the next few days, so Vincent was scared that it would be found. Josh, who was clearly already cooperating with the police, actually lied to Vincent. He's like, "Yeah, I'll handle it." But really, he planned on looking inside the bag, figuring it was connected to the burglary, and then turning it over to police. Well, he couldn't have imagined what was inside that bag, because it wasn't jewelry or weapons. Instead, he found a number of VHS tapes, videotapes for those of you that are a little bit younger. These were the kind that you record on yourself with a video camera. And that was really odd. Josh got even more curious about what was on these tapes that Vincent would be so worried about the cops not finding. So he brought them in the house, put one of them in his VCR, he turned on the TV, and what he saw was horrifying. Just imagine thinking that you know your roommate. He's your friend. He's someone you trust, someone you live with. And imagine seeing them on a video carrying out the most vile acts on young women. That was what was on these tapes. Even though the man in the video was wearing a ski mask, Josh recognized his voice. He knew it was Vincent. In some of the videos, he's yelling at these women to do certain things to him. He's recording the acts while it appears that he's in their homes at night. One was a woman in the shower, but it wasn't at Vincent's house. And as Josh watched in horror, victim after victim appeared on these tapes, being held at knife point, forced to commit acts, and then commanded to take a shower to wash away any evidence. And sometimes Vincent would join them. He would degrade these poor victims, call them names, yell at them, and even hurt them, all while recording. I can't even imagine seeing that. It's sick, and it made Josh sick to his stomach. He never suspected Vincent would be capable of something like this, and that's what makes it even more terrifying. And the deeper he dug inside that bag, Josh found other disturbing items. A number of women's thongs, photos of women in compromising positions in different states of undress, including Vincent's current girlfriend of 3 years, Luz LaFargo. Josh called his other roommate Steve into the room so that he could be another witness, and then they both looked through the videos and the other items, and they were in total disbelief. Then they called the police. None of the victims on these tapes or in the photos was Megan, just to be clear, but we'll get there soon enough. Officers came back out to Vincent's house to collect the bag of evidence, and they now had probable cause to do a more in-depth search of this house. And in Vincent's bedroom, they located a chest of drawers with what appeared to be souvenirs from his crimes. There was a number of valuables, women's clothing and undergarments, including bras, and more pictures and other incriminating items, knives, a black duffel bag with a 20-gauge shotgun inside, handcuffs, a camera, a bunch of personal papers with Vincent's name on them. And on the floor next to a desk in Vincent's room was a green bomber jacket with orange lining. But this wasn't significant to these local officers. It didn't match the other type of souvenirs that Vincent had kept from his victims. So it was left crumpled on the floor for the time being. Now that the videotapes were in possession of the detectives working on Vincent Sanchez's case, they were diligently going through them frame by frame. He was facing serious charges for what was on those tapes. They wanted to make sure they documented as much evidence as possible so they could prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. What started as a burglary charge was now escalating by the minute, tape after tape, victim after victim, each one needing justice. But who were these women? And were they even still alive? That's when profiler Sharon Hagen is called in. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but Vincent lived in Simi Valley, the location of all the victims being terrorized by the man pegged as a Simi Valley rapist. Yeah, Sharon knew each victim's case in depth, and it didn't take long for her to realize the women on those tapes were the same ones that she'd been trying so hard to find justice for. Up to that point, she had only read about their horrifying experiences, heard them cry to officers in interview rooms, but seeing the acts happen brought each terrifying attack into focus. She knew she had found the Simi Valley rapist. It had to be Vincent Sanchez. They just had to put all the evidence together to prove it. The first step, as hard as it would be for the victims, was to see if any of them could pick Vincent out of a lineup. The problem was, he wore a ski mask during the attacks. That was one of the similar characteristics that Sharon has used to connect these cases, along with a black duffel bag that he brought to each scene, his kit that he would use, with a flashlight and gloves, and sometimes a camera, as well as other connections that were things like that he took their thongs with him, stole other personal belongings or valuables when he was inside their homes. And Sharon hoped that some of these women would be able to identify those items that were collected from Vincent's house. Another thing that was eerily similar in all of these cases was that the offender seemed to know a lot of personal information about the victims, where they went to school, their nicknames, who their boyfriends were, and other chilling details. And not only that, he would act as though he was dating them. And after the attacks, he would sometimes be nice to them and have deep conversations about religion, even divulge information about his childhood. Sometimes he was even familiar with the layout of their homes. And that's scary. They knew they needed to start with Donna, the woman that had just been attacked on July 10th, just days after Megan's attack. She hadn't mentioned the attacker wearing a mask, but they thought that her case was connected to Simi Valley. So could she identify Vincent in a lineup? She had already described him and his truck and his house in detail. She told the officers that the man had a green Ford Ranger with beige interior, a bedroom with blackout-type curtains hanging from the windows, and dark spiky hair with brown eyes that kind of slanted down at the outer corners, thick black eyebrows and high cheekbones, a mustache with a sculpted beard, and he was about 5'8" with muscular arms and chest. Donna saw his face, and even though it must have been absolutely terrifying to go to the police station and see if any men in that lineup matched his description, she knew she had to. And she did. She immediately picked out Vincent Sanchez as her attacker. To Sharon, this meant that if those other cases she had connected were truly committed by the same man, he was a serial offender, and she needed to go one by one and see if they were able to recognize items that he had taken from them. They also need to gather DNA from every victim and then test every item to see if they matched, the underwear in particular. But remember, these attacks went all the way back to 1996, so at least 6 or 7 years. And there could be more victims that Sharon wasn't aware of. But what about Megan? Because we're here to find out what happened to Megan. Well, based on the time frame in which Donna was attacked and the AK-47 being accessible to Vincent Sanchez, Sharon advised the detectives on Megan's case to reach out to investigators in Simi Valley to explore any potential connections between the two cases. It was more of a hunch than anything else, but it was worth taking the chance. Even though the circumstances of Megan's disappearance didn't quite fit Vincent's usual crimes, Detective Barrios and Detective Lorenzen were permitted to speak with Vincent's roommate, Josh, and he let them look at the AK-47. Josh met them at his house that he shared with Vincent. He took the rifle case out from under his bed. He opened the case, and he let investigators take a look. The first question they asked was, "Do you have a cleaning rod for this gun?
I'm going to tell you right now, they were probably holding their breath waiting for that answer, to which Josh said, yes,
I did.
Did. Now that stood out. He said he usually kept it inside the barrel of the rifle unless he was using the gun, but now it was missing.
He said the last time he used the gun, the rod was there. This was big for these detectives.
Not only did the gun and the type of ammunition match, but this rifle was missing the cleaning rod.
And a cleaning rod was found at the scene on the ground near the intersection where the Pontiac was located.
So they asked permission to look around, and Josh showed them into Vincent's room. They didn't have a full search warrant at the time, but they were allowed to look with their eyes.
And that's all they needed to realize that the green bomber jacket was on the floor next to his desk.
It must have been a chilling, but also an exhilarating moment, because this was a link between Vincent and McGuigan. They immediately took photos of the jacket and the condition it was in and the location, and then they went back to get a probable cause search warrant to seize that jacket for testing, hoping that McGuigan's DNA would be found on it. Meanwhile, the investigators on McGuigan's case wanted to interview Vincent's roommates Stephen and Josh, and anyone that had been with him the night of July 4th into the early morning hours of July 5th to establish whether this man had an alibi. Here's what investigators learned. There was a tiny get-together the night of July 4th. It consisted of a few of Vincent and his roommates' friends and some of the surrounding neighbors that they were close with. They all drank and watched fireworks in the front yard until about 10 p.m. Then everyone dispersed. Steve and his girlfriend Jessica went inside the house to wind down. Vincent's friend Anthony did as well. Now, he was spending the night and sleeping in Vincent's room, and Vincent made a bed with a sleeping bag on the floor of the living room. Vincent stayed up late and drank beers with the next-door neighbor, Joaquin, who told investigators they probably had at least 8 beers each from 10 to 1:30 in the morning when Joaquin went home. He said Vince was funny, he was talkative, he was happy, he was in a good mood, and he didn't seem angry at all. And though he was drinking, he didn't seem wasted either. And I was thinking that was probably like 1 or 2 beers every hour or so. Vincent's roommate Steve told investigators that he remembered getting up to use the restroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he didn't see Vincent in the living room as he walked by. And that's where the window was, so he quickly just took a look outside. And the truck that Vincent drove wasn't in the driveway. Remember that around 2 a.m., McGuigan was finishing up mint chocolate chip shakes with friends and getting a ride back to Lindsay's house in Newberry. Vincent's roommate Steve also said that he woke up again in the middle of the night around 4 a.m. His girlfriend Jessica was awake as well, and he walked out to the living room and he still didn't see Vincent, but he heard something outside in the driveway. So he looked out the window and he sees Vincent washing his truck. Now, he recalled it was still dark out, and when asked if he thought it was kind of unusual, he said, not really, but he did mention it to Jessica. And she looked over at the clock, kind of like when you check what time it is and you say, at this hour, he's doing that. It was exactly 4:11 a.m. Joaquin was asked if he noticed anything that morning as well, and he also saw Vincent washing his truck at 5:30 a.m. He even waved to him. So that must have been quite the cleaning. If he's doing it at 4 and he's still cleaning at 5:30 in the morning. He even bragged to Steve later about how much better the truck looked now that he shampooed the seats. But it makes you wonder, what prompted such an intense cleaning in the early morning hours after Vincent was not seen inside his house? And that's what the investigators wanted to know. Not only that, Jessica mentioned seeing damage to the front of Vincent's truck, and she asked him what happened, and he told her, I got stuck in traffic. I was blocked in, and I bumped into a car. None of this seemed like a coincidence at all. He was gone around the same time frame McGuigan was attacked. And when more friends are interviewed, investigators find out another piece of information that doesn't seem random. His close friend George said that Vincent was actually really upset on the 4th of July. It all stemmed from an incident that happened back in June. His girlfriend Luz had a daughter that was graduating from high school that summer, and they threw a party with close friends and family. Vincent came, but he began making a scene when Luz's ex-husband, the father of her daughter, showed up. They got into an argument, and Vincent actually tried to fight him. Well, this did not go over well with Luz and her family. Vincent was told to leave, and he was never allowed over again for a celebration, especially ones that involved Luz's ex-husband. who had every right to be present for his own child's milestone. Well, 4th of July was another one of those celebrations. It was a goodbye party for Luz's daughter, who was going off to college now, and it was also a holiday celebration, and Luz's ex was going to be in attendance. Vincent was not allowed to be there, and he was not happy about it. And Vincent had already been expressing his frustrations to George, everything from being out of work to his relationship with Luz falling apart. He resented Luz's sister, Elizabeth, because she was trying to get Luz to reconcile with the ex-husband. She did not like Vincent. She wanted him out of her sister's life. Luz had come home with a black eye a couple months before this, and Elizabeth had enough. She actually confronted Vincent, and he told her she better watch out. He was going to kill her family, kill Luz in front of the kids, and they would never find the bodies. Clearly, this man was way more unhinged than even his friends and his roommates were aware of. George explained that this had been going on for a while. Luz's family didn't want her to be with him since way back when they first met. They were always up and down, breaking up, getting back together. It was toxic. But it was because of Vincent. He was majorly possessive, he was violent, and they tried living together once, but she didn't like how much he drank and how much he controlled her, so she moved out. He had gone on meds to try to work things out with Luz, and for a little while, things seemed normal, whatever that means. They even went on a vacation in May, but Luz suspected that he'd come off of his meds in the last couple months because his behavior was getting more erratic. George explained that on the night of July 4th, Vincent kept calling Luz over and over again, but her sister would answer and told him to leave them alone and that he wasn't going to ruin their night. And she hung up. He couldn't reach Luz, and she never called him that day. Apparently, she considered them broken up, but he didn't. And what was chilling is that George admitted Vincent had confided in him that he was at his breaking point, that he was going to kill the next person that set him off, that he had done some very bad things that he couldn't even tell George about or he wouldn't want to be his friend anymore. In just the week prior to the 4th of July, Vincent was standing in the road with George, and he was holding an AK-47 that belonged to Josh, and he was aiming it at passing cars, saying that he could easily stop a car with one shot. And then even more terrifying, Vincent took George out to Black Canyon and showed him places where he said he could hide a body and it would never be found. I just want to pause and say, if my friend had said any of this or waved a high-powered rifle at cars, I think I would call the police, because it's kind of beyond me why people don't alert the authorities to these things, but maybe it's because of fear. George said he didn't think Vincent was serious. He thought he was just depressed and he was talking irrationally. But he'd been staying in his room with the lights off, with dark curtains covering the windows for weeks, even telling George that he hoped that cops would shoot him and get it over with. But here's the thing. Luz's sister's house was right near Megan's friend Lindsay's house. And Megan was over there a little after 2:30 a.m. during the same time that Vincent was not seen at his house. Investigators now speculated that in a rage, after drinking all day, Vincent stole Josh's rifle and decided to go confront Luz and her family. He drove over there. But from the interviews that they conducted, the party had ended by 1:30. So when he realized it was a lost cause, he headed back home. But that is when he saw Megan hugging Lindsay out in the roadway in front of Lindsay's house when she went back to return her cell phone. They believe that this triggered Vincent, whether it was anger or he was turned on or both, they don't know, but they think that he followed Megan as she drove back home and he attempted to run her off the road. But she resisted. And he escalated his attempt and used the gun. It was all adding up, especially because Sharon was making more connections. When the news picked up the story of potentially catching the person responsible for the Simi Valley offenses, Vincent's mugshot was posted in the paper, and a woman named Margie immediately felt chills go down her back. She recognized that face and immediately called the police. Back in early October of 2000, Margie had just gotten off work around 3 a.m. from a shift at a restaurant. She was on the same highway Megan had been on when she was attacked. When Margie called in, she told police she made a report after a man chased her all over Simi Valley with his lights off and tried to run her off the road with his truck. She would speed up And then he would get right behind her to the point of almost hitting her. And when she would try to get away, he would follow her. She finally exited the freeway, and so did he. She became more and more terrified. As she was trying to get away, she saw a police car parked in a parking lot. She drove over frantically, and the officer listened as she recounted what had just occurred. She described the truck in detail, even going so far to tell them it had a particular fireman's emblem on the back window. This matched Vincent's truck. This proved that Vincent had a habit of using his truck to try to run women off the road, just like what investigators believed happened to Megan. Now they wanted to examine the Ranger, and when they did, they noted it had damage to its right side, and the front bumper guard was missing. By now, the rifle, the jacket, and the Ranger were being processed at the crime lab, as well as a number of other pieces of evidence found at Vincent's house that I previously mentioned to you. While all of that is being tested, which could take a little while, Simi Valley investigators had Vincent in an interview room pressing him about the items they had received and the content on the videotapes. It was hard evidence that he had harmed those women who were still being identified at the time. But after he was confronted with so much, he couldn't deny it. He admitted that he had forced himself on a few girls, but he would not be specific. And he really tried to downplay the whole entire thing, saying that he did those things because his girlfriend Luz made him angry. He'd admitted to stalking his victims, to peeping in their houses, to writing down their routines, even entering their bedrooms when they weren't home or when they were sleeping. And he would practice his attacks by getting familiar with the layout of their home, and then he would break in and he would wait for them. He described wearing a ski mask and gloves and said he would record the attacks. But these confessions only applied to the Simi Valley women, not to Megan Barroso. When it was Megan's lead detective, Rick Barrios' turn to speak with Vincent, he knew that he had to get on his good side. He had to warm up to him. He had to build a good rapport before he even started to ask about Megan. They had small talk about what Vincent liked to do, what kind of person he was, and about his family. Vincent talked a lot about how much he loved his girlfriend and her children. And that's when the detective tried to appeal to his emotions, and he asked him, how would it feel if a child that you loved went missing? And as soon as he said that, Vincent's mood changed entirely. He went silent. He would not talk about anything. He would not talk about Megan at all. He swore he had nothing to do with that case. Barrios turned up the heat, but the more he pressed him, the more defensive Vincent got. There was one point where he actually compared himself to O.J. Simpson, and I was like, yikes. But he was referencing how O.J. was wrongly accused and how the same thing was happening to him. And I don't even want to get into that case, but Vincent shut down. He just ended the interview. But by this time, detectives had enough evidence, and they sadly had a pretty good idea where they might find Megan's body. By this time, they knew she was probably deceased. And on August 3rd, they sent search teams with bloodhounds and cadaver canines out to Black Canyon, where Vincent had bragged to his friend George that he could hide a body and it would never be found. I guess unless you tell your bestie and then he rats you out. But this is a very remote area southeast of Simi Valley, known as a common dump site, which is just sad, but that was the fact. It was about 20 miles from where Megan's rental car had been found, and there were at least 3,000 people participating in the search, including Megan's own mother, Suzanne. They were combing through this terrain, which is actually very gorgeous if they weren't looking for a body. People would go there to meditate, to hike, and catch the amazing view of the sunset. But the further you go, the more isolated it becomes. And there were a lot of places that you could get lost out there. But luckily, George had instructed them on where Vincent said he would put someone, and they kept searching. At the same time, CSI was combing through Megan's apartment and took DNA from personal items so they could create a profile to compare to the items collected from Vincent's, including the jacket. When they examined the jacket, they noticed a hole near the bottom left side. Now, it didn't appear to have blood anywhere on it, which is why they think Vincent took it with him. But there were microscopic drops of blood that he couldn't see. And when it was swabbed and tested, it matched Megan's DNA. More evidence just stacking up. especially when it came to the inside of the Ranger truck. They knew that he had washed the interior, but when they sprayed it with luminol, it just lit up. Now, they couldn't exactly test it, and we'll explain why in just a minute, so they couldn't determine whether this was Megan's DNA. But the pattern itself was telling. There was a horizontal stain across the passenger seat from top to bottom, which showed that Megan had been sitting upright next to Vincent as he drove. They even took paint scrapings from both vehicles, and there were plastic fragments that were embedded in the Pontiac's side. They were tested, and they matched the Ranger. So this seems to be a slam dunk, right? Megan's jacket has blood on it. It's inside Vincent's house. The Ranger is found. It has blood inside. The gun matched. And of course, the circumstantial evidence from what Vincent's friends told the police. But a defense attorney could easily create reasonable doubt. The Ranger actually belonged to Luz. Vincent was just borrowing it. And he wasn't the only one that had access to it. There was nothing that connected Vincent to all three: the rifle, the truck, and Megan's jacket. I know it sounds like it's straightforward, but they still needed more. So they continued combing the truck for anything else they could find. Maybe a tiny fiber, a hair, something. And this is because they could not take DNA from that seat because it had been thoroughly washed. Yes, luminol could show that blood had been there, but the actual testing was too diluted. They could not find her DNA. So they knew blood was there, but couldn't prove it was Megan's. By August 5th, the search teams up on that canyon still hadn't found anything. But that same day, they brought in a canine named Bella, because earlier, a woman named Erin McGuire alerted the sheriff's office that she was walking her dog Rusty near a ravine on the north hills of the canyon, and he began acting really strange and dragging her towards a ravine. And when she looked up, she saw the search helicopters, and she thought there could be a connection. So the cadaver canine Bella was brought in, and she picked up the scent, and even her handler, Miss Teller, could actually smell the odor. Bella pulled her towards a 50-foot drop down a steep ravine, and the dog stopped at the top. They knew they were close, because Bella was a special dog that was trained to sit when she discovered the scent of a human body, and she was now giving that signal. Her handler knew that they had to descend down into that ravine and allow Bella to bring Megan home. And Bella delivered. She brought her to a really dense patch of brush and sat down again. And investigators and crime scene teams came to that area, and they soon uncovered Megan's remains. They knew that it was her right away, by what she was wearing, but not her clothing, because most of that was missing, but the ring on her finger, the one her mother had gifted to her. Sadly, her body had been in the elements for a month, and it was severely decomposed. But in the bright sunlight on that canyon, the investigators noticed something. Bright red glitter in Megan's hair. It sparkled and shined, just the way it had under the lights of the fireworks on the 4th of July. An added touch to their outfits that Lindsay had purchased. It was pixie dust, a brand of glitter sold at Hot Topic at the time. It was a very fine glitter used for makeup looks, your body, or even your hair. And Lindsay sprinkled a little on herself and the girls as they were enjoying the celebration that night. Never did she think it would ultimately become evidence in her best friend's murder. In that moment, it was just something noticeable, but not a connection until later. Now, they were focusing on a recovery mission to get Megan back to her family so she could be laid to rest after her autopsy. It took Michael Perrigan and his team 6 hours to remove Megan's remains from that canyon. He was the lead supervisor at the crime lab and an expert in trace evidence and DNA. Her remains had been buried under 12 inches of yard waste, and then there were 2 feet of brush laid on top of her to conceal her body. And now the investigators were alerting her loved ones of the devastating news. Detectives went to Lindsay's. And in that moment, when they told her the news, she said she tried to scream, but nothing came out. It was as though time was just frozen. And once the initial shock had faded enough to think clearly, Lindsay had only one wish. She wanted to sit face to face with the person that did this to her best friend and look them in the eyes and ask them why. Meanwhile, Megan's father was devastated. I mean, there was no words that could even capture what he was feeling. When he tried to speak, he talked about how inadequate words were, like sadness or pain. It just didn't match the profound void that Megan's death had carved into his life. Megan had always been his shining light, the joyful daughter who changed his life the moment she entered it. But now, in losing her, he felt like the most important part of himself was gone forever. And the news was traveling across Ventura County, and it was painful. This community had hoped and prayed for Megan's safe return. Hundreds of volunteers had been combing through neighborhoods. They were hanging up those posters, and they were all surrounding the Barroso family in hope that Megan would return safe. But with this heartbreaking confirmation of her death, they were grieving. Megan's loss was not a private family tragedy. It was a collective heartbreak. This entire community was hurting. They all believed in a happy ending, and that's not the one that they got. And now I'd like to tell you about the autopsy. The Ventura County Medical Examiner's Office conducted Megan's autopsy, and further forensic analysis was done by Dr. O'Halloran, who reviewed the physical findings in detail. Megan had been found wearing her green fitted shirt, a sheer pair of white thong underwear, and she was lying on her side. Her left arm was across her torso, with her right arm positioned above her head. This was a posture that raised some questions about whether she had been placed in that position or had moved into that position herself as she was in pain before dying. What stood out was Lindsay had reported that Megan had been wearing, in her words, white granny panties. They were those normal cotton underwear, not thongs. Megan's capri pants were nowhere to be found, and the fact that she was seemingly in someone else's underwear meant that hers had been removed, which led investigators to conclude that she had been violated. And we're going to get back to this later. Because there were reasons that this made sense, besides the obvious ones. The medical examiner did confirm that Megan had been shot, and the bullet did not hit any major arteries, and it didn't even appear to damage her spinal cord. According to Dr. O'Halloran, the bullet came to rest very close, dangerously close to her spine, but probably did not leave her paralyzed or even unconscious immediately. In fact, the doctor believed that Megan had remained alert and aware of what was going on and aware of her injuries for some time after the shooting, which was actually very heartbreaking to think about. The internal bleeding that she would have suffered would have happened gradually, meaning that with medical care, within ideally 30 minutes, Megan would have survived. And that made me so angry. It's really sad to think that there was a possibility that Megan was still alive as she was abandoned in that dark ravine. Analysis of her injuries, the blood loss patterns, this was a detail that just deepened the pain of everyone that loved her. And I would be wrecked thinking about her lying there in those last moments, and it actually made me sick. She did nothing wrong. This poor girl. And now I have to talk about the SA. So we know Vincent's MO. We know what he usually does to his victims. But due to the advanced state of decomposition, nothing remained in that area at all. And, that's the area that's tested in these kind of cases. So it couldn't be examined or even swabbed. No male DNA could be removed. And scientifically speaking, the process that her body went through the decomposition process, it compromised the other pieces of clothing as well. So they could not be sufficiently tested. However, as each victim of the Simi Valley attacks were being interviewed, they were identifying undergarments that belonged to them and were found in Vincent's house. He had a fixation on thongs. Even his friends kind of jokingly said that he could spot a woman in a thong from yards away. And not only that, his second known victim from Sharon's research was an 18-year-old girl named Jenny, and she was confronted on June 14th of 1997 at 4 o'clock in the morning. She woke up, she saw a man in her house with a knife. He threatened to kill her, and she got up and screamed, and her father woke up and chased him away. But she realized when she went back in her bedroom later, the number of her thong underwear were missing and taken by the intruder. His ninth known victim, and we're going in time order, I'm going to call her Sarah because I'm not trying to use their real names. She was 20, and it happened March 20th of 2000, and the reason I'm bringing up these two people were the thong underwear. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. She was in her bedroom when a man broke in the middle of the night, and he told her he was a police officer. But she knew pretty quickly that he wasn't when he started to demand that she do things to him, or else he would hurt her. He apparently had taken a knife from her kitchen and was threatening her with it. He was demanding that she put on a pair of thongs that he had retrieved out of her dresser. She did. And then she said something was put over her head, and he started to snap photos of her. She was one of the women that was later identified in one of the video recordings that Vincent took from this woman's bedroom. He later took her car keys and drove her in her own car to his house and made her put on 2 different pairs of satin thongs from inside a black duffel bag. And he continued videotaping other things that he did. And then, when he was taking her back home, he started asking her things about her life and her boyfriend. When she started to cry, he called her a snobby, pretty girl, and also said weird things like, "I would marry you and get you pregnant with a bunch of kids." It's just sick, disgusting, and evil. And then he finally dropped her off at 5:30 in the morning back at her house. But knowing that at least 2, possibly 3 of his other victims had been asked to either put on thongs or he'd taken thongs, it made sense that the same thing happened to Megan. He probably had them with him in his duffel bag that he took. If not, perhaps he went somewhere and he had a pair at another location. Either way, it was clear to detectives that he had violated Megan, even if they didn't have DNA proof because of his history of violence towards women and his pattern of his crimes. By this time, Vincent's girlfriend Luz was cooperating with the authorities, although it wasn't easy to get her to talk, I will say that. I guess you could call it an odd type of loyalty. I don't know if that's the right word, but it seemed like maybe it was out of fear that she didn't really want to admit that much about her relationship with Vincent. But it could have also been shame, because she admitted that once he confessed to what he did to the Simi Valley girls, she knew that he probably killed Megan too. And I'd imagine that finding out someone you loved and trusted had done these type of things would be pretty hard to reconcile. Maybe she even blamed herself, even though it is not this woman's fault, by the way. But he would gaslight her. He would make her believe that his anger was all because of her. She did call him on a recorded line for the police, and she tried to get him to admit to killing Megan, but he told her that he didn't know anything about that case, and that the cops were just trying to stack charges against him now that he confessed to the things he'd done in Simi Valley. Which, by the way, he said was exaggerated. He said it was only 4 or 5 girls, not 11. Like it makes a difference? 1 was one too many. Remember the pixie dust glitter that I told you about? I'm sure some of you maybe even have a bottle from back in the day. I know I do. It's still being sold today, but back then, it wasn't that popular. It didn't sell very well. Only 10,000 bottles of that specific glitter had ever been manufactured by 2001. Well, when the CSI used tape lifts in the Ranger on the seats, and on the upholstery in the truck, and in the bed, and they looked at these strips under a microscope, they noticed the same red glitter that was also lifted from the bomber jacket and in her hair. And under a microscope, Dr. Ed Jones, a forensic scientist, was able to tell the glitter actually had a hexagon shape to it, and it was very unique. It was red on one side and silver on the other, which made it shine the way that it did. It was 250 microns in size. Just to compare, a human hair is about 70 microns. So small. And we know how small glitter is. But now, they just needed to see if any of this glitter was found on something that Vincent had in his home. And when they tested the rifle, and they fired the test bullets, which actually matched fragments at the scene, a technician found a single piece of red glitter on that gun. Just one of these tiny little pieces had been left behind, and that was all they need to connect him. I know it was on the jacket, and I know the jacket was in his house, but still, they needed more. And by August 10th of 2001, Vincent Sanchez stood in court facing 62 charges against him. The charges spanned years and reflected a pattern of escalating violence from breaking and entering homes, then watching his victims, to physically harming them, and then killing Megan. And to think, glitter really confirmed the connections forensically. Glitter is so hard to get rid of, which is why people make glitter bombs, and why some establishments, if you know what I mean, started to tell women they couldn't wear it to work because men were coming home with sparkles all over them and getting caught, or even being accused of something they hadn't even done because it transfers so easily. But yes, glitter was the case cracker, among, of course, so much other evidence. But it just really helped to build a solid case against Vincent. And on Sunday, August 12th, a crowd of 500 people came together to celebrate Megan's life at Peace Lutheran Church. Half of the attendees filled every seat in that sanctuary, while the other half watched on monitors from an overflow area in the adjacent hall. The church was beautifully decorated, overflowing with flowers and large portraits of Megan. At the center, on a softly lit pedestal, sat a plum-colored urn containing Megan's ashes, with a deep blue velvet bag gently resting underneath it. Suzanne and Art, Megan's parents, sat quietly apart, but each were surrounded by their own circle of loved ones and supporters. And Reverend Jerry Esther, whose daughter Cricket that I told you about, shared a close friendship with Megan throughout their high school years, remembered her boundless spirit. He spoke about her smile and how it just reflected Megan's personality, how she walked in a room with a bounce, and her energy and laughter. She radiated joy wherever she went. An original song was written in Megan's honor called Megan's Song, and it was performed beautifully by a small choir. The lyrics resonated with everyone there. There was one line that said, "It's a long road that brought our Megan home, but we can't give up, not yet. We are strong-willed, pulling hearts uphill, and we won't ever just forget." And I told you there were 10 victims that Sharon had linked to Simi Valley. But with 11 being Megan and then Donna and Margie, it came to 13. And many of their cases were connected through items, through DNA, photos, and videos. Investigators eventually pieced them all together, and they believed they knew what happened to Megan Barroso in the early morning hours of July 5th of 2001. Megan was outside of Lindsay's house hugging her goodbye when an angry Vincent Sanchez, leaving his girlfriend's sister's house after not being invited to their party that night, he spotted Megan, who fit the physical characteristics of all of his other victims, petite, with dark hair, which is also what his girlfriend Luz looked like. Whether he wanted to take out his rage on Megan or do what he'd done before to the women he'd attacked, he followed her to the freeway. And as she drove home, he was armed with his roommate's AK-47, which was most likely going to be used to taunt Luz and her family. But he told George he wanted to hurt the next person who pissed him off and crossed his path. Whatever the reason, he was armed and dangerous. When he was in the area he felt was dark enough, he pulled up behind Megan and attempted to run her off the road, but she kept going. As their vehicles neared the off-ramp of Los Angeles Avenue, he sped up, got beside her, and fired a shot into the passenger side of her car. This appeared to be a warning shot, scaring her into complying, but she didn't pull over. He then floored his truck and sped off in front of her, then parked it in the intersection, got out and waited for Megan to stop at the light. As she pulled up, he began shooting, with bullets nearly missing her as she ducked and lunged to avoid being hit. He was coming towards her, which was evidenced by the forensic data that showed the shots got closer as he closed the distance. She then floored the car, and as she passed him, he shot into the driver's side. This shot hit her in the stomach. She veered off the road, and when the car went up on the median, Vincent reached in the window, unlocked her door, and took her out of her car and placed her into the passenger seat of the Ranger and drove off. The medical examiners don't believe that she died right away. However, inside the truck, a significant amount of blood was found pooled on the passenger seat, as well as smeared along the side, indicating that she was inside for at least a little while as he drove to the next location, where he removed her capri pants that were never found, and he probably got rid of them because they had blood on them, and the underwear was never found as well. He put the thongs on her and committed acts on her before he drove her to the canyon and threw her over into the ravine. Then he put branches and brush on top of her to conceal her body. They believe he may have returned to the scene to do that at a later time, to make sure she was hidden, and he probably only had time to place her there that night when he had to go back home and he began cleaning his truck. At least 2 people witnessed this. The Simi Valley crimes alone carried a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and he pleaded guilty to all of them, and to Megan's murder on October 4th of 2001. But the judge rejected the murder plea because he didn't indicate whether it was first degree or second degree, so the case went to trial. He was eligible for the death penalty, which the prosecution was seeking. And I'm not going to go into the deep arguments on each side, but the defense was saying that the state couldn't prove that McGuigan was alive when the violations occurred. So this meant that the death penalty wouldn't apply because there needed to be special circumstances. The state brought a bunch of witnesses forward, pathologists concluding that McGuigan was likely able to survive 15 minutes up to 2 days after being shot. There was no evidence that she'd suffer rapid blood loss at the site of the attack. Instead, the most probable cause of death was a severe infection that was triggered by the bullet going through her intestines, causing bacteria to seep into her abdomen. This would have gradually poisoned her system, resulting in actually a slow and agonizing death. This was critical. It was necessary to show this was the truth in order to get that capital murder charge. And he attempted to self-exit with a sharp piece of metal in his cell, but he was not successful. Nearly 2 years after McGuigan Barroso's murder, Vincent Sanchez's trial began on May 5th of 2003. That's actually yesterday. I'm recording this on May 6th. That was not planned to be so close together. But prosecutors argued that Vincent Sanchez wasn't just violent, he was methodical. He planned every attack with precision. He came into homes, mass, he binded his victims, and he even recorded this. The defense saw it a different way. They said, no, he was enraged, he was upset, he was unstable, he had mental health issues, and that's why he carried this out. It wasn't planned. So they did go back and forth. And there was a lot of people who came forward, of course. People who testified like Lindsay and how her life had changed ever since her best friend had been murdered. And guess what? The defense decided to put her mental health on trial because they wanted to discredit her in so many ways. But what was ironic was that her mental health only deteriorated because of what happened to her best friend, which was Vincent's fault. It was terrible. I think one of the most important pieces of evidence that were brought out in trial was the broken rearview mirror in the Ranger. When it was returned to Luz, she testified that before she let him borrow the car before July 4th, her rearview mirror was fine. But there had been a struggle inside that truck between McGuigan and Vincent. That meant she was still alive because there was no other reason it would have been so forcefully knocked off and broken like that. He told Luz he accidentally hit it with a golf club when he was putting them in his truck. No. It would have taken much more force, like a kick from McGuigan as she was trying to get away. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned its decision. Guilty of first-degree murder. I can't even repeat on here what they brought up during the sentencing hearing, because remember, sentencing hearings are the prosecution brings bad things. Yes, he deserves death. Defense says, no, we want to humanize him. There is still value in his life. He should stay alive. All I'm going to say is that there was another brutal incident that occurred when he was only 22. And at the time, he was living with his 18-year-old girlfriend and her 13-month-old daughter. I'm just going to leave it as there was an alleged fall that occurred while in his care, but it was much, much worse. Now, she survived, but it was dark. It was very dark, unspeakable things, okay? So, needless to say, they really thought that the punishment of death was warranted. And sure, his family came forward. They had a lot to say about his childhood, but nothing they said, because everyone's had a past, right? I mean, saying like his dad was an alcoholic and he was violent and da-da-da, and the sisters and brothers came forward, and I understand that. We don't ever want to minimize what someone's gone through, but it doesn't excuse a willful action. It doesn't excuse someone deciding to take their life in that direction. And they brought up other things, like he was young and things happened to him, so it might have made him see violence with women as like something that aroused him and whatnot. But I'm always like, okay, how does that justify, a lighter sentence? At the end, the jury recommended death for Vincent Sanchez. And when the verdict was read, he showed no emotion. He didn't yell, he didn't break down and cry, he didn't react at all. Investigators who worked the case later said that they were certain that if Vincent had not been caught, he would have killed again. And even though he was given the death penalty, in 2006, California's death penalty system froze all executions, and as a result, Vincent Sanchez remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison, serving what has now become a life sentence. And at least he can never hurt anyone ever again. I can at least say that. But is it ever justice? No. Because for McGuigan's family, it's never going to give them closure. Megan's mom and a bunch of her friends gathered at the site where Megan's remains had been found to celebrate what would have been her 21st birthday. And they did place a memorial bench there. And you know what they had engraved on it? The plaque read, "Be aware, be careful, look out for each other," in memory of Megan Barroso, 1981 to 2001. And yes, be aware, be careful, look out for each other. But I feel Megan and everyone who loved her, her friends and everyone, they were looking out for her. And still, monsters are among us. I'm so sorry to her friends and loved ones, and I hope you always remember her. And I thank you all for being here for Megan's story. See you in my next video. Bye.